Hello, everyone. We're so. My name is Taryn Abner, and I'm so glad you're here at the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health monthly webinar series, where we have different speakers come in and talk on various subjects related to um the adolescent sexual health in Alabama. And our organization envisions access to comprehensive sexual health for adolescents throughout Alabama and advance our mission to champion healthy adolescent development through medically accurate and equitable sexual health education and services. So this month we have Dominique's going to come speak with us. Um, she is the owner of Paperback and Frybread, and she's really, really cool. We've been talking for a couple months, so I'm really excited to hear her speak. So I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we can get started.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Everybody can hear me? Okay, good, good, good. I'm really, really pumped to be here. I'm very excited about this topic. I'm incredibly passionate about this topic, and we're gonna just literally dive right in, and I'll do introductions and why I feel like I'm qualified to have this conversation with you guys. But Taryn, if you would, because once I have my full screen, I won't be able to see the Zoom call. If anyone has questions or raises their hand, just pop right in and let me know, and that way I can come in and
Yes.
see it a little bit better.
I,
Um, all right, so let's go ahead and I'm hopefully this is going to work. You guys seeing this okay? I got to get it organized because, of course, it wants to go backwards a bit. All right, we're going to present in full screen. Okay. Oh, actually, the Zoom stayed on. Can everybody see my screen okay? Did that actually work? I'm terrible with technology. All right.
you got it. It's great. It
So
looks great.
Okay, awesome. So, like I said, we're gonna jump right in, and if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand or type it in the chat, and you're not gonna hurt my feelings for interrupting. So, we're gonna be talking about decolonizing sexuality, unlearning purity, culture, and reclaiming body autonomy. So, my name is Dominique Burleson. I'm the owner of Paperbacks and Frybread. We're an indie bookstore. I'm online and I'm a pop up. So that means I travel around and we pop up mostly at events. We do adult book fairs, but I also do a lot of powwows and just Indigenous gatherings. Period, because that's what I focus on. I focus a lot on Indigenous representation, but also just my motto is I'm helping you decolonize your bookshelf. And so trying to get more of that diversity and inclusivity in books. We know that book banning in America is a really big issue. And so that's a big passion of mine. However, with decolonizing, it's very multifaceted. And so my life, the more that people get to know me and the more that I start to share my story, there's a lot of different aspects that I have been decolonizing. And that's why I'm sitting here today. So I am a member of the Lumbee tribe. We're the largest tribe east of the Mississippi, out here in North Carolina. I am a wife. My husband and I, we've been married almost 17 years. We have 6 kids together. And I consider myself a cult survivor or a religious extremism survivor. And people always want to know, well, Dom, what's the name of the cult that you were in? Those people that marched to the Capitol on January 6th, those would have been my people. 100%. Thankfully, my husband and I, we've been out since 2020. 2020 was our big breaking point. um, I am an educator and speaker with having the bookstore. I am a curriculum creator. I've worked with brands like National Geographic to help bring more Indigenous and more diversity into their stories and their curriculum. I'm a writer and an artist. I'm a bead artist. I'm also an American Indian Studies student at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. That university actually was my tribe's first Indian school. It used to be called the Croatan Indian School. That was brought into it was our only school. So you've heard of like boarding schools and things like that. This was what was called a normal school. So my people weren't boarded there. They just went to school like kind of everybody else. So that's kind of a quick introduction on who I am. Now, going back to being the cult survivor, the religious extremism survivor, that is why I'm able to kind of tell this story about purity culture. I was raised from the time that I was 3 years old in very deep evangelicalism. So when you think of like the satanic panic, when you think of end time theology, all of those things, I was on the very extreme side of those types of beliefs. I was by the age of 9, I was picketing abortion centers. By the age of 11, I was a certified evangelist. Like I had went through classes to become an evangelist. Laying on hands, praying on people, that was me at the ages of 11 and 12. So you can see the indoctrination at a very, very young age. But purity culture was something that even to this day truly affects my life. A lot of those things don't even touch the fringes of my life anymore. But purity culture is one that has been deeply damning and has probably been one of the hardest things to overcome since leaving the church. Um, so purity culture, if you don't know what it is, it looks different to everyone, but there are some things that are similar that we all have in common if we were brought up this way. It is rooted in religious extremism. That is the foundation. Patriarchy is its other foundation. Those are its two roots. And it centers on teaching that a person's value, and this is mostly for women, and like it says here, marginalized identities, that our value lies in our sexual purity, meaning being a virgin before marriage, but also how we behave within the confines of marriage. It's not just centered around virginity. Virginity plays a huge part. It is one of the most important parts when speaking to young children and teenagers, but it does still carry over. You are not off the hook once you get married. It enforces shame and fear around sexual desire, body autonomy, and identity, often through abstinence only education and rigid gender roles. And I'm going to go over all of this. The harms of purity culture extend beyond adolescence. Like I said, a lot of people think purity culture is just something you're brought up in, and then once you get married, then it's a free for all. It is not by any means. And I'm going to share that with you. And I do want to make a side note. I'm going to be talking a lot about some deep themes with abuse and just sex in general. If any of that is triggering for you, you are not going to hurt my feelings to peace out now. Like, please protect your peace. Nothing's going to be super duper graphic, but I am going to talk about these things, and I just don't want anyone to be hurt by anything that I'm talking about today. So let's jump right in. So what does it actually look like? Like, what does purity culture look like? Because it isn't just, hey, save yourself for marriage. That seems like a very just watered down version of purity culture. That's kind of what it hides behind. The first is shame. It like I said, it's the number one issue with purity culture, is because that's what it centers on. Because sex before marriage, we in the church and in these religious organizations, we were brought up on a lot of these different metaphors. I specifically remember being told in youth group one day about a story of a cheerleader and head of the football team, and they love each other so much and they plan on getting married. However, the cheerleader had kind of slept around, and it's always the girl, just in case you were wanting to know. It's always the girl. Cheerleader was sleeping around, football player was not, and they when they get to the altar, they are going to exchange shoes. Yes, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever, y'all. It never does. But when you're 12 and 13, somehow you make it work. But they are exchanging shoes. And when he gives her his shoes, they're bright and shiny and brand new. And when she gives him hers, they're dirty and nasty. And who wants that? Right. And some of these metaphors are about being a chewed up piece of gum, a used dirty toothbrush, a smelly dirty shoe, a rose with broken petals. You can see how these metaphors are not about safety or valuing yourself. It's all centered on shame, that you are going to feel that shame when you get married, and it's always about marriage. There's never an alternative. Okay. um, and that leads us into the strict gender roles, because we are always explaining that sex is a way for women to keep their husbands. I Many of the books that I was given on marriage always talked about, like, if your man started cheating or was dealing with porn, you had to give him more sex because you weren't doing enough. And this is what I'm talking about, how this purity culture ideas, they're not just for kids and adolescents. It does work its way into the marriage bed or any kind of serious relationship, because it is always the woman's role to use sex as means of keeping her husband in line. It's not about relationship. It's not about even the basics of love. It is a tool for women. And for men, it's completely different. And we'll talk about that. The pleasure is only for men. Um, Pleasure is never discussed from the point of view of a woman. And then we have not just talking about sex, but the views of women. Modest is hottest. I don't know if anyone ever heard that, but that was something that was drilled into us teens. What our bathing suits looks like, how short our shorts were, our skirts were, if we were wearing a top that was, you know, buttoned down too low or anything like that. It was modest is hottest, modest is hottest. So it starts to skew your idea of what you even look like in the mirror, because it's not about being comfortable. It's not about dressing the way you like. Am I modest? And there's no one can even give you a definitive answer on what that looks like, just in case you're wanting to know. Purity culture also has a basis of double standards. And boys will be boys. I feel like we've all heard that scenario, and we even hear it around abuse cases. Look at Brock Turner, for example. I always like to shine the light on him, and how so many of the men in his life were like, this was just a mistake. If he gets punished, it'll ruin his life. But it was never that same conversation about his victim, about the girl that he harmed. And we see this boys will be boys, the boys club, all of that kind of stuff. That's rooted in purity culture, right? Men can sleep around and they're named a player. They might even be respected. Um, and if it's in the church, men can even go as far as abuse. We can have pedophilia. We can have any of these just outrageous things happening within the church by the hands of men, but they can be redeemed. They can ask for forgiveness. Their sins can be forgiven. People will pray over them. But the moment that a woman either sleeps around, or maybe she's been abused, she's already labeled as unclean. She is not redeemable. She is no longer worthy. And like I said here, this is the same for assault. It doesn't matter if it was consensual or not. The labels are still the same. Um, and this is a very broad view of purity culture and what abstinence only teaching, what comes out of that. And again, it's not just kids and teenagers. This is affecting women as well. And so this is what it looked like and how it manifested in my life. So I was a teen that developed very, very early. And there was a lot of shame around that, because once I hit middle school and your girl got boobs, that's what everybody wanted to talk about. That's what everyone wanted to center on. And then I constantly had to be thinking about the shirts that I was wearing. What could people see? Having to layer all of these different things, because the attention was always put on how I was developing into a woman, but it was always a negative thing. And it was always my responsibility at 12 and 13 years old to ensure that men didn't look at me improperly. And so you can imagine what that is like when I'm already sexualized at the age of, 11, 12, 13, somewhere around there, already being sexualized. And now it's my responsibility to make sure that no one sexualizes me. How am I supposed to handle that? I don't even understand why people are looking at me this way. I didn't ask for these, I didn't want them. And so then I started having to deal with things within my family. You know, if I raised my hands and my belly showed, or I bent over and you could see cleavage, those were a big problem. So I was having to constantly be aware at all times on how my body was being presented to the people around me, and especially if I was in a room that men were in. And 12 years old, guys, 12 years old, constantly thinking about sex, and not in any kind of healthy way, not because I was going through puberty, but because that was the conversation that was constantly happening around me. Something else that happened from a very young age was a focus on marriage. I remember having little boyfriends in like ninth and 10th grade, and everyone already talking about us getting married or when we get married. It was just never being 13 and having a boyfriend because that's just, sometimes part of the teen experience. It was always about marriage. And so every relationship that I got into, it was, well, you have to marry me because that's the only reason why we're in a relationship is you have to marry me. And as I got older, and started becoming more of like an age where I could get married, it started to sabotage these relationships because we couldn't just date. It had to be centered on marriage. Everything had to be centered on marriage. And it it was very harmful to the person I was in a relationship with, but it was also harmful to myself because that was the only thing I could focus on. Because that's where my value lied, was that if I was going to be a good Christian woman, I was going to be a pure woman, I had to get married. And we'll see how that actually worked once I got married. But I want to share the story where everything kind of changed for me. So these two pictures are very important. The top picture, I am in ninth grade, and you can see I'm very bubbly and very open. That bottom picture, I am in 10th grade, and you can see that there's a loss of spirit in these two photos. And I actually didn't even notice this until a couple of months ago, when I was somebody did a thing on social media about like, what did you look like in high school? And I pulled these two photos up, and I was like, man, why am I so serious in this my picture from 10th grade? That's not my personality. And then I started kind of doing the math on what happened between these two photos. And so at 15, I was abused by my boyfriend. And it was one of those times where I wasn't even sure what had happened. Um, I thought, well, this is normal, right? We love each other. He said, I love you. I didn't want it, but that's okay. Like I made up all of these excuses, and I tried to even talk with some of my friends, and they were like, mm, that doesn't sound quite right. And it actually ended up being a guy friend 2 weeks later who was like, Dominique, I don't think that you understand what happened. And I think you need to tell someone, because I was starting to unravel with this. I was starting to have panic attacks, and I just couldn't quite understand what had happened. And there was the guilt and the shame, of course, but I wasn't able to really put it into words. And the day that it had happened, I had wrote it down in my journal and in my diary. And when my friend told me what he believed had happened to me, I picked up that diary and I opened it, and I hadn't even noticed that I had actually written the R word, scribbled it across the page after I had wrote my story down. After I had written what had happened, I had actually scribbled the word across the page, and I hadn't even realized that I had done it. But I kept believing that it was my fault because, you know, the way that abuse is taught is it has to look like in the movies, right? It has to be a fight and there's got to be black eyes and it's this whole thing. But that's not what it looked like. I ended up telling my youth pastor's wife, who had no idea what to do with that information except for to go and tell my parents. My mother had no idea what to do with that information except for to tell my stepdad. My stepdad decided to call the cops, and so we had a detective at our house at like 11 p.m. at night who did not believe me, who clearly told my parents that, oh, she's just upset that she lost her virginity. This is nonsense. And they kept kind of pursuing it. They even arrested the boy because he was technically older. It was a statutory rape type thing. They did arrest, and he admitted. He admitted that I had said no. He admitted that I didn't want it. He admitted all of those things. And every man in my life told me that if I pursued charges, I was going to ruin this boy's life. And so I dropped it. And now I like I put here, I was his first victim. I was not his last. It happened multiple times, and he's still walking around free. And it's because everyone put that blame on me. Everyone put that burden on me. And no one ever talked to me about what had happened in like a gentle, loving, compassionate way. It was always, well, you can get a second chance at your virginity, right? You it you did something wrong, but I don't think your future husband will be this upset. That was the language that was around that. But 15-year-old me couldn't process that because my entire life, my identity had been centered on being a pure virgin when I got married. And anything outside of those boundaries meant that God no longer wanted me. No man would ever want me, that I was just dirty, I was broken, and I started to live that way. Before my incident, I felt pretty special. There was kind of a hierarchy being in high school and being 15 and not have had, I didn't have sex, even though all the girls around me were having sex. I felt kind of a superiority complex because I wasn't doing the things that other girls were doing. But then when I would have a boyfriend again, these are boyfriends who are not raised in purity culture. And so I'm trying to keep him for marriage at 14, 15 years old. And then I'm trying to figure out, how do I keep him if I can't sleep with him? What am I supposed to be doing? And that caused a whole host of different types of just emotional abuse from boys and just a lot of confusion at that age. Very insecure about my body, which I already talked about. That there was a lot of centering on being curvy and shapely at that kind of age. And then even just having shame around a period, right? Because that's sexual health as well. And having a period and even like bleeding at school and not realizing it, there was so much shame and so much anxiety, so much stress around all of those things. And I was never taught anything other than anything that comes out of your body and all of the bodily functions, they're gross, right? And so I just constantly felt gross. Everyone's looking at me. I'm trying to hide. I'm trying to cover up my body. Just lots of mixed messages. Afterwards, I had a complete disconnect from myself. I didn't view sex as something that was pleasurable. I didn't believe it before, but I thought it was something that you were supposed to enjoy with someone. I didn't have that look anymore. I constantly looked for a connection, right? Because all these people are talking about how wonderful sex was, but I was looking for it and I hated it every single time. And I didn't understand why. I was very, very numb to the experience of any kind of intimacy. Loss of self worth. I was putting myself in very dangerous situations once I got older and like out of high school. I was having one night stands. I was going home with people. I was meeting people. I was so focused on trying to find a connection with another human being because I was seeing it. I was seeing my friends having relationships and being intimate with their partners and it being a wonderful thing. I could not find that. And I didn't understand why. And every single time there was shame afterwards because obviously I am broken. There's something wrong with me, right? And I started to throw everything that I had believed. out the window because my entire identity was centered around my virginity, my purity, being clean, being valued, all of that around one tiny aspect of myself. And like I said, lack of boundaries, and then even trying to get sexual attention from men, that meant good attention. And so you can imagine the things that I would allow to happen to myself in order to have some sort of connection and feel like there was some sort of value, even though I never felt valuable. I did end up getting married. I got married at 21. We were very, very young. We got married 6 months into dating. I don't recommend that at all. um, my husband had never had a girlfriend. He had never kissed a girl. He had never obviously slept with anyone. He was a virgin. He had been brought up in purity culture as well. And I remember sitting with him one day when we were talking about marriage and shaking in my soul because I loved this boy so much, but I knew he was not going to love me once he realized who I was. We had met at church. We were doing Bible study together and all these things. So nobody really knew what my past looked like. Because I was trying to be on the straight and narrow. I was trying to do all the good Christian things now. I'm trying to get my life back together, trying to feel something. And I looked at him and I said, I don't think you're gonna want me after this because I'm broken merchandise. And that's verbatim the term that I used to describe myself. And I remember the look in his eyes of pure confusion. He could not understand why in the world I would ever consider myself that. And when I told him that I wasn't a virgin, his response was something along the lines of, that's it? Really? You thought I was going to care about that? I don't care. And I could not process that because here's this good Christian boy, right, who is a virgin, and you're not bothered by the fact that I'm not a virgin. And he was just like, okay. Once we got married, it still was affecting us because as a wife, I'm supposed to be a servant. I'm supposed to use sex in servitude to my husband. Going long periods without sex is sinful. We have 6 kids. So, like, every 2 years I was pregnant. Um, there wasn't a whole lot happening in between there, because trying to heal a body and stuff. But there was so much grief on my end. Again, my husband did not care. This was not something that he was holding on to at all. I would be terrified if my husband knew that I was on my period. Um, if if he even touched me and I thought he could hear the pad, that is the kind of fear that I had of just thinking periods were so disgusting. Um, Sex looks a certain way, right? There's no deviation from missionary. There's no experimentation. There is no nothing. That's all sinful because the pleasure is only for the men. It's not for the women. Okay. You are supposed to do whatever it is that your husband wants, but you don't get to initiate anything. You don't get to explore none of these things. Porn is the same as cheating. Masturbation is sinful, and it's also a form of cheating. The quiverful movement, you may not know what this is unless you've been in any kind of Christian circles. But quiverful is about having as many children as possible, which means being very anti-birth control. Having a lack of understanding on hormones and hormonal cycles and how that works. Even watching sex in movies is sinful. All of these things, this is all rooted in purity culture, right? Because sex is only pure in one singular way. And I knew nothing about how periods work, sex works, none of these things. I only had that one singular view of what sex looked like. Now, as again, I've been with my husband for 17 years and we have gone through a lot. And our sex was something that was kind of, I don't want to use like a thorn in our side, but it was something that we were stumbling over because we were trying to figure all of this out, but we couldn't get like our church leaders out of our bedroom, right? Like those opinions, those thought processes, the teachings, all of those things were kind of just keep showing up in our bedroom. And there was so much that we just didn't know, that we just did not understand about the act from an emotional viewpoint and just how like our bodies worked. And it wasn't until um, we had our last child and we started to kind of step away from the church that all of that started to change, and we started to ask questions, and even me myself started to ask questions, and the stuff wasn't adding up. It making our marriage exhausting, and things had to change. So in 2020, this is where a lot of my healing began to happen, was during lockdown. There was a lot of catalysts and a lot of cracks in the foundation to get me to this point. But 2020 was really where I threw it all out the window and was like, I'm done. I'm not doing any of this anymore. And so some of my healing, TikTok, we were all home, right? And TikTok was a big part of our lives. But this is the first time that I was being exposed to opinions and education that were very much the antithesis of how I was brought up. Because again, in purity culture, you're not questioning things because everyone around you is believing that way. And so I also being brought up in evangelicalism, you don't go seeking for other answers. There's only one place that you're getting answers. It's a very isolated belief system. And so I ended up getting on TikTok and started to just kind of share the questions that I was having, and then realized there were so many other people that were having those questions too. So started creating content around deconstructing from my faith, which also led me into connecting more with my Indigenous roots. I've always been brought up Native, but most of our practices were always demonized. And so this was an opportunity for me to start making my own pathway. And so I learned from people who had never been raised that way. I learned from the Indigenous community. I started reading a lot of books. I've been a book reader my whole life, but I started to read things I wasn't allowed to. So I started to read adult romances. I started to read more erotic romances because some of the stuff I had just never been exposed to. Even when I was sleeping around and having one night stands, sex was still one dimensional. I wasn't learning anything in those moments. I wasn't having any kind of growth in those moments. It was more of a rebellious thing and in an attempt to try to find some sort of connection. But then even my husband, we started to have these conversations. We started to put things on the table. We started to really talk about things instead of it just being all these unsaid, unspoken emotions and feelings. And what do you like? What do I like? It felt like being teenagers, sneaky teenagers again, even though we had been together for years, because so much of this stuff was very, very new for both of us. And this is just a picture that I thought I would drop up because, like I said, it affected me even as an adult. If you look at this picture from 2008, that's actually at my wedding. And the dress that you see, that's my reception dress. If you can see that tuft that is in my cleavage, my mother forced me to sew that into my dress because she said it showed too much cleavage and there would be men from church at my wedding. So you can see the purity culture and how that carried on even on my own wedding day. The next picture is 2024, and you can see my bra strap is showing. I don't have a cardigan or a covering or anything. This was the first time I had ever worn anything like that in my entire life. And I had to document it because I realized there was so much that I was still unlearning. There's so much that I still hadn't experienced as an adult, and I'm almost 40, y'all. And so now we move into having to decolonize body ideals, shifting away from being really function focused, right? That our bodies are just serving one type of function, especially our sexual organs, and reclaiming like a more holistic understanding of the body. Listen, most teams have no idea what a luteal phase is, let alone the other two phases of a moon cycle or of a period, how they affect the mood, how they affect energy. And we also, in the Indigenous community, we view the body as something sacred and that everything is connected and whole, and celebrating it as a source of pleasure, identity, and autonomy rather than like a symbol of sin. You know what I'm saying? Um, this is one of my favorite books for this topic. I do not care what age you are. If you are a parent, you're an educator, you're a teacher, or you are just a person who is interested in this topic, this is the book for you. This is The Moon Within by Ada Salazar. It is a middle grade novel and it is in verse. Um, but it is absolutely beautiful. And I think that it sums up this topic in such a beautiful way. It teaches decolonizing body ideas because this whole book centers on a young girl who's getting ready to start her first moon, and her mother wants to throw a moon ceremony. But the daughter is like, absolutely not. I do not want people knowing that I'm about to start my period. This is ridiculous. And it goes through her whole thought process leading up to this ceremony. She also has a friend who's going through their own identity transformation. And so it brings together not just understanding sex in a decolonized way. One of the opening paragraph or one of the opening chapters, the mother talks with her daughter about her body, like all of it, and going through the medical terms for everything, but then also shows her like, hey, you have a button here, but it's just for you. You don't share that button with anyone. That's just for you to feel good and nobody else. And I was just blown away of seeing a mother having that kind of conversation about pleasure in a accessible way for a child to understand. And it really brings together understanding a period in something so much more beautiful than how we do in mainstream society, and really bringing honor and that sacredness to girls or who are starting their cycles, that this is something to be celebrated. It's not something for you to have shame about. It's not something that should be gross. I love this book. And one of the quotes from the books that I really liked is, Celia, you will not begin womanhood in doubt or in shame, but surrounded by the strength of women in your community. And this is what happens when kids are given proper education, right? Because we're eliminating that shame, and we're giving them the tools, we're giving them the truth. When we're decolonizing sexuality, it's not just about sex, but it's also about sexual identity. And as an Indigenous person, this is about like reclaiming the diverse understandings of gender and sexuality within my own culture. And this is something that's been around for eons. You may have heard terms like two-spirit, which is like a pan-Indigenous term, and its meaning it's outside of binary or gender binaries. This is someone who embodies both the masculine and the feminine, and it's not about who they're sexually attracted to. This is more sacred, it's more spiritual, and it's hard to. I could a whole webinar could be dedicated to understanding two spirits. I am not two spirits, so I'm not going to go into that topic too much more, but understanding how two spirits is something that had been in Indigenous cultures for generations. And by decolonizing these identities, we as Indigenous people, and that's not just Indigenous people in America, that's Indigenous people from around the globe. When we reconnect with these type of teachings, celebrating diversity and the fluidity of gender and sexuality, we're reclaiming a lot of our culture in ways that most people are just completely rejecting. And then there's this disconnect with our culture. There's a disconnect with our belief systems. Here are two books on decolonizing sexual identity that I highly recommend. These do cover two spirits, but I think what's important with these two is it's showing how these identities have been around for literally eons. People like to have the conversation that this is just something new, right? The people are just making stuff up now, and it's not true. There are cultures from all around the globe, not just indigenous to Turtle Island, but on other continents as well, where we see these types of teachings that have been around again for ages and ages and ages. But when purity culture comes in, again, it's very strict binaries. It's one purpose and one person purpose only. It only looks one way. We have the evidence that says otherwise. So why are we not equipping children with actual education when it comes to sex, sexuality, gender, their bodies, how their bodies work? Because when we limit those, then we're limiting their understanding of themselves and understanding their own value because they get to choose what is valuable about them. They get to say, this is valuable about me and not, I'm a virgin. That's what makes me valuable. No, their whole self, their whole person. So here are some resources for kids. These are some books that are very gentle in the way that they approach these conversations. And I wanted to share these. Now, we will have access. I think Taryn said that if you want the slides, you're more than welcome to get them through her, or you can come through me. So you can have access to these if you can't screenshot or whatever. But these books not only are non-fictional, but we have some fiction in here too that is just showing it in action, right? It's not necessarily pointing it out, but it's showing these things in action. Moontime Prayer is a really good one, especially for young girls who have not started their period yet or have just started their period, because it really stresses on how beautiful that functionality is and that it is not something for a girl to have any kind of embarrassment or shame or whatever. And that's something that we really need to reclaim with our young girls and those who menstruate, is eliminating that shame, because that is a colonial construct. Again, that is not something that is rooted in any kind of indigenous teaching. In most indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, when a woman was on her moon, they would separate her from the men. It was because she was so powerful. There are many tribes who would separate the women who were on their periods from the men because they were afraid that the men would drop down dead because her power was so great when she was on her moon. For teens, again, here are some gentle nonfiction, but also some fictional books. Confessions of Alleged Good Girl. This is almost identical to my story. This is about being raised in purity culture. But then we also have Milo and Marcus at the End of the World. So this is a queer story where their parents are conservative Christians and they're kind of being blamed for what they think is the end of the world happening. And so I picked those two fiction books just because they really relate to my story. But I feel like a lot of teens can kind of relate to these stories, right? Being brought up in a conservative household and having to constantly fight that internal battle of what you've been raised, but what you know is true on the inside. All Boys Aren't Blue is a really great memoir. So again, we have fiction, we have more educational topics, but then we have people sharing their own anecdotal evidence and their stories that are really, really powerful in showing that it's not in your head, right? Now, for adults, um, I have a lot more resources, so if you would like more, these are just what would fit on the screen. But I did pick these for specific reasons. One, the body is not an apology. Purity culture puts so much shame on women's bodies, and we carry that into adulthood, right? The way that we dress, the way that our bodies are even formed, right? If you are more curvy, you are automatically more sexualized, if you want to be or not. And I feel like healing from purity culture or getting out of purity culture, being able to love your body and the state that it is in is a excellent step. Then we have this Neon Gods by Katie Robert. I love and adore Katie Robert as an author. She does write dark romance, but the reason why I'm specifically highlighting her books is because her books contain consent. That is something that she is known for. That is something she's incredibly passionate about. She will explore a lot of darker themes within this book, but there is consent involved. And coming out of purity culture, sometimes we don't even know what that looks like because this is a dark romance. So the themes are a little bit more risque, but she doesn't leave that part out. And it's a huge message to men and women on how, you've got a kink or a fetish or whatever. That's great. Consent can still be there. It still needs to be there. It's still a necessary part. And this is something that, again, purity culture doesn't talk about. Consent is never on the table, right? It's never on the table because purity culture is about women performing for men at all times. Um, and now, if you are someone, because I know that I had a few followers that mentioned they were going to pop in here and they too are healing from purity culture. If you happen to still be in the church, if you still consider yourself a Christian, but you've left evangelicalism, I highly recommend The Great Sex Rescue. This Sheila Ray is an amazing teacher who has literally been calling out the toxicity of the church in regards to the bedroom for ages. And this is a really great book that I recommend for people who are still religious, who are still in the church, but have been harmed by those ideals of purity culture. And it could be messing with your marriage or just your identity alone. She tackles all of it. She tackles all of it. And then I have the this book Ace. This is just talking about the getting out of the non-binaries, right? And so if you have questions, or maybe you have a child or you have a loved one who falls into this category, or you're just trying to understand those fringes that you've never experienced before, listen to people's stories. Stories are sacred. And so anytime that I could recommend a story from a perspective that I am not part of, and that is a way to learn, right? When we build community with people and we learn from those communities, that's how we can actually grow, regardless if you are asexual or you identify that way, or if you even know anyone. This is a great book just to challenge your ideas around sexuality and sexual identity. Had to throw in another queer romance. I'm So Not Over You. This is a spicy adult romance, and it is a gay couple. And I have some friends that have just drooled over this book and said it was absolutely wonderful. So wanted to share that too, because again, that's how I learned. I was reading books. That's how I learned about a lot of the things that were happening that I wasn't taught. I didn't know anything about. And Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. This is a more medical Facebook for women, and really kind of understanding our bodies and knowing who we are. And so that's my resources. I have a ton more. So if you need more, you just reach out. I'm going to try to quickly wrap this up so we can squeeze in some Q&As. But we've kind of explored the harmful impacts of purity culture on sexual and body autonomy, right? We've taken what all of the roots of purity culture and have seen just through my story. And my story is not unique. I know plenty of women who my story mirrors almost identically. We've talked about the shame and how these restrictive teachings can really affect people, not just our kids, not just our teens, but as adults as well. When we decolonize these beliefs, we can reclaim healthier, more authentic perspectives on sexuality that embrace the body and honor these diverse identities, especially those celebrated in Indigenous cultures. And again, not just talking about Turtle Island. This kind of work empowers us and future generations to develop a positive relationship with sexuality. And just throwing it out there, being open to any other kind of collaboration, or if there's any questions, or if you guys need resources for different age groups, let me know. This is all of my information. I'm Paperbacks and Frybread literally everywhere on every platform. I'm not on X, but I'm pretty much on everything else. I did drop this link right here, paperbacksandfrybread.com/meet me. I have a free PDF that has a ton of Indigenous books as well as creators to support. I share this with all of my presentations. So if you're interested in downloading that, and that has all of my information on it as well. So if you're looking to connect in any kind of way, you can just download that PDF and all my information is there. I know that this is kind of like a whirlwind to jump through and such a like really intense topic. But if you have any questions, let's hear them, y'all.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you would like, or we can just read them from the chat. Either is fine, whichever you're comfortable with.
Hey, I thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As awful as that sounded, the part that struck me is just how mirroring the larger culture that problem is across the board. And one of the things that I was curious about for groups like the campaign in Alabama is there a way of kind of presenting through social media or web for those kids who are looking to get to that information, kind of flags, ways of tagging and getting their attention and getting them to that information?
Yes, we do. We have our
So
social. I've got it. We
go
have our
ahead,
social
Taryn.
media pages. Our Instagram is AL Teen Health, where we also host a class that is free for youth ages 14 to 24, I believe, where we have a class where we have speakers come in and we do it in person or as different implementations of it. It's called Share. The Share project helps teach students about how to like proper safe sex practices, how to educate themselves. We also have something that's called Include, which is also a workshop that we teach that people can come to where we talk about safe sex. We talk about how to advocate yourself, how to advocate for yourself at the doctor's office, how to properly use a condom, how to properly understand proper use of contraception. So we have those kind of things in Alabama. We just can't do them in schools.
Yeah,
So
I absolutely understand that. And that's one of the things, like, to think about looking into the larger culture, anyone curious and investigating. And I'm just curious, do we know, were there certain types of resources that you were able to identify and make those big adjustments to your understanding?
Do you know what the biggest one was for me was watching other women talk on like TikTok, seeing those videos where they were normalizing things that I had always thought were taboo to talk about, especially in the presence of men. Having that validation from just other women having a very natural conversations about period or discharge or any of these just really natural occurrences. I think we have to start normalizing that conversation and it not always being like a formal thing like we're having right here, but just getting especially younger people, right? Like having younger, early 20s folks having these conversations online because the kids are going to find it. Like that we have to
Yeah,
meet them where
yeah.
they are at. And I think having more access and then having that kind of education in a very casual way, right? We all remember how stressful sex ed was when we had it in school, right? It was very like, it was intense. It was a very intense feeling. Whereas when you're scrolling on TikTok and you're having these types of conversations, then you can kind of direct to the education, right? You start talking about, good grief. It was only like 2 years ago that I even found out that there were 3 phases to a period cycle. And that was why there are sometimes I have loads of energy and then there's some you can't peel me off the ground because I have no energy. And once I started to realize that, it was like, oh my God, the light bulb went off. And so now I'm teaching my daughter like the same thing. But I think these more casual type of conversations on social media where we are normalizing the conversation instead of making it so taboo, it's going to be step one. Because if we can't get into the schools, we have to meet them where they're at. And where are they
Yeah.
at? They're online, and then we start directing them to the resources, the safe resources where they can get even more information. So I really think having these conversations online in front of them, they're going to pick it up and they're going to start to see that it's not so taboo, that it's not so gross, or it's not this or that. Yeah, that's where I think we need to be.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Any other questions? And you guys are more than welcome to reach out to me. Instagram DM is probably your best bet. My inbox is pure chaos at the moment. Let's see, I'm gonna go through the chat and see. Do you feel like you've had to leave Christianity entirely, or just the oppression of evangelicalism? I get this comment a lot. So I still love the person of Jesus. I still love the teachings of Jesus. I love the fruits of the Spirit. I love the Beatitudes. I don't think you can go wrong with those types of teachings. I do not consider myself a Christian just because of the title that it when people hear Christian, they are thinking, red hat, January 6th. There's just a lot of violence attached to that term now. But I have a spirituality that's very tied to my culture as well. So my spirituality, it doesn't have a label. It's very personal. It's very intimate. It's very just what works for me. I do not shame Christianity at all. I have plenty of friends that are Lutheran pastors and Episcopalian priests, and I love them, and I love what they're doing and the work that they are doing. I will go to war with most evangelicals, though. It's more of the extremism that I have a problem with, because my main question with that was how I was raised for almost 30 years under the name of a man who taught love and about the least of these, but yet the followers are just being so hate-filled and just violent and all of these things, and I could not reconcile the two. So I still have a lot of beliefs that are rooted in Christianity, but I wouldn't call myself a Christian, if that makes sense. How do we use the term decolonize? How is it different from unlearning? They kind of go together. So when I talk about decolonizing, we are specifically talking about separating the colonized notion and education away from original teachings. Colonization is about conquering. It is about ownership. It is about hierarchies. And those are completely different from what was original here of the Indigenous people, most of us were a matriarchal society, so we viewed women in a very different way than the colonizers did. And colonizing is a mindset. I don't want anyone sitting here to believe that I think all white people are colonizers, or that when I'm talking about a colonial mindset, I'm only talking about white people. I could show you some natives that have a colonial mindset. This is a mindset shift. And it does, unlearning is part of that. But when we are decolonizing, it is really a separation of thought between what was forced and what is about control and what is about sacredness and what is about wholeness. And we talked about like the body autonomy and things like that, community. Those are the types of things. So when decolonizing is kind of the umbrella term, and we use unlearning is one of the tools to decolonize. Let's see, there is one more. Okay. I think we may have answered all the questions. Did anyone else have any questions? And like I said, you're more than welcome.
Any final questions? I don't think so. So thank you, Dominique, for speaking. We really enjoyed having you talk.
Thank you so much. I'm incredibly honored to be here and for you guys to give me a platform to share my story, but hopefully encourage you with how you interact with people. And I always like to end with that. Remember that your story is sacred as well. I know that you all have a story to tell that is tied with this topic in one way, shape, or another. But the only way that we're ever going to fix the problem that we have right now is to continue to tell our stories and to connect and build community. So thank you for that opportunity. And I really do appreciate you guys coming.
Thank you. So if you guys want more information about the Alabama campaign, our website is alabamacampaign.org. You can find us on Instagram, AL Teen Health. This webinar will be uploaded in our YouTube channel, which is the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. So you will be able to see it on YouTube either later today or definitely by the end of the week. And I will email you all by the end of the week with all the resources that were shared and the link to the webinar if you'd like to watch it again if you missed anything. I want to thank you all for supporting the work that we do. Thank you to Dominique. And we will see you all next month for our monthly webinar. So thank you so much.
Bye,
And please fill
guys.
out. We'll have it's also in the comments. Please fill out. We have a survey that helps us, better understand our audience and continue our work. So please fill that out if you can. I'll attach it again in our email to you so you can know. So, that helps us a lot out knowing about like helping plan our work for the next coming months. So thank you so, so much. And we will see you all next time.
Bye, guys.